Welcome to the Blanchard LeaderChat podcast. Hi, this is Ken Blanchard. We need a new leadership model in business today, one that values both people and results, where leaders see their role as serving instead of being served. In this podcast, my friend and colleague Chad Gordon interviews experts who help us explore different aspects of leadership. I know you'll be encouraged and inspired by what you hear, and you'll walk away with ideas and insights that will help you be the type of leaders others want to follow. Ready to get started? I'll be back at the end of the interview where I'll share what I've learned and how I'll be putting it into action. Now enjoy this installment of the Blanchard LeaderChat podcast.
Christina Maslach, welcome to the Blanchard LeaderChat podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for having me on.
It's so good to have you here. You're one of the co-authors of the Burnout Challenge, Managing People's Relationships with Their Job. Christina, tell me, why was this book so important for you to wrap all your research and time around?
Well, I've been doing research on this phenomenon for several decades now, when I kind of stumbled across it almost by accident. And what I discovered is that this was something that people didn't talk about. There was a lot of stigma attached to it, but it was really, really important for them and their lives and, the work that they were doing. And as people have been talking more and more about burnout recently, although it's been around for a while, what I've been finding is that people are, in a sense, focusing on the effects, but they're not really looking at and thinking about what do we do about what's causing it. And so it's really important to kind of, I think, change the perspective and make clear to people what is going on, and that if you simply help people cope with the stressors that cause burnout, you're being helpful and thoughtful, but you're not actually preventing burnout. And in the long run, we really need to create better ways in which we design the workplace so that there is a greater match and a greater fit between people and what they're doing, and they get to thrive, and the organization does well.
Unless you're a superhero, I don't know how you've had a career without, at one point or the other, just having, a stretch where you're feeling burnout or you're having the effects of it. What did your research find? What were some of the main causes of burnout?
It's a response to chronic workplace stressors that have not been successfully managed. And I'm quoting World Health Organization here as well on that. And a couple of important points. One, chronic stressors. Chronic means high frequency, all the time, most of the time. And we know from work on stress and coping that it is much harder for people to recover well from chronic stressors than from occasional, or emergencies or acute stressors or something like that. You really need to be able to relax, get back to your normal life, recover, and be able to go forward. So chronic is one of the key important aspects about that. And then the phrase "not been successfully managed," there is an optimistic note there. They could be managed. They could be done, taken care of in different ways, in a better way, so that they are less frequent, or perhaps don't have quite the negative impact on people's lives and well-being and how they do their job. So what we have learned about burnout is that it is not simply a stress response to workplace stressors. There is that's the exhaustion part of burnout, but that's not all there is. And I think people sometimes think burnout is just you're tired or overwhelmed with work. No, it's a necessary first step, yes, as a stress response, which all of us as human beings have, and thank goodness we do. But with burnout, there are two other things that happen. One is that there is a increase in a negative, hostile cynicism, mental distance from one's job, take this job and shove it, kind of thing, which means that people start changing how they're doing their job, and instead of trying to do their very best, they're doing the bare minimum. What is the least I can do and get out of here, still get a paycheck? for me, that's almost more the hallmark of burnout than simply you have a stress response of exhaustion. But then the third part is it's not just being negative about the job. You begin to develop a negative sense of your own effectiveness on the job. What's wrong with me? Why can't I handle it? Maybe I've made a mistake going into this career. I'm not doing well, etc. So it's that trifecta, if you will, of exhaustion, cynicism, and professional ineffectiveness that really constitutes a full burnout response to the work.
We're going to talk in a bit about some of the mismatches that you found in terms of some of the ways the ways you can look at it on the job, so you can see where some of these burnout issues are evolving or coming from. But one of the things you addressed it there, but I just want to point blank ask you. There's people that I'm sure they're going to listen to this and say, well, no, my boss just says I need to work harder, or maybe I'm not cut out for this job. But there's a lot of personal guilt around feeling burnout, isn't there?
Mm-hmm. There can be. There can be also a lot of anger. There can be a lot of fear, actually. What we see often is that people feeling like there's nowhere to go if I have questions, if I want advice, if I'm having a bad day and just need a shoulder to cry on or something. Because if I'm working in an environment where it's not supportive, you can't trust people. You don't know really whether they're going to throw you under the bus or whether they're going to, kind of help you out. And are you going to do that for other people? So that kind of socially toxic environment, which is one of the mismatches, actually, the community of people that you work in can actually help not help, but it engenders other kinds of feelings. And that one of fear we were seeing long before the pandemic. You don't dare say anything that's indicates you might be less than 100% at that moment. You don't want to ask for help or point out that you need some advice or, get another opinion or something like that. You don't dare say no when you get asked to stay later, work longer, come in on your days off, etc. So there's a lot of those kinds of emotions that can arise as a result of this.
And right now, I haven't been to the office in a couple of years now, and a lot of people haven't. So there's this always on mentality that adds to it too, doesn't it?
It can, and it can whether you're in the office or not. Actually, what we're seeing is a very mixed record, so to speak, of how people deal with working from home or working from some other place. And in some cases, it's actually been better. They're getting out of that socially toxic environment, or they have more control over their work. But for others, like you said, it blurs this boundary, between personal life and home life and work, and your work life. And sometimes that can be difficult because you do have that always on kind of thing. But working harder is something we hear people complaining about a lot, as opposed to working smarter. And I think another theme that we're really trying to put forward in our book is that there are smarter ways of doing things. It's not just you step on the pedal and just go faster, kind of thing. If it's really not leading to better performance and doable, sustainable work performance without, all these negative consequences on the people who are doing the work.
Let's dive into some of the mismatches that you define, you and your co-author. Let's talk about workload. You talk about culturally, you bring up some stories about the work culture in Japan specifically, but you can define some of these mismatches, and you can once you know the awareness, you can actually do some things to kind of supplant that, right?
That's the goal, really. If you identify where these mismatches exist, and we found 6 areas so far where they occur, they also are pointers for where you should go. In other words, how do we pivot and now start moving towards a more positive, fit and match between people in the job on this? So it's useful to sort of assess this and then, kind of use that guidance. So with workload, the mismatch very, commonly involves work overload. You have high job demands, but you have inadequate or insufficient resources to meet them. So high demands, and yet you don't have enough time, you don't have enough people, you don't have the right information or the equipment to get it done well, on time, etc. So that mismatch of high demand, low resources, a better match involves how do you make this more manageable? How do we get in what we need? How do we get rid of obstacles and stuff that clutter up, what we're doing? Make it a sustainable workload rather than this imbalance of too much to do and not enough to get it done well.
We're not going to dig into all the mismatches, but what are the ones that you think are that really caught your eye that I don't want to say you're easy to address, but ones that you know they're out there, and let's just all be very aware of it so we can actually curtail it when we have the opportunity.
Yeah. Well, one of the mismatches that we see pop up more often is control. And basically this means some kind of autonomy. You have some appropriate level of choice and discretion in how you do the job and make course corrections when needed and, figure out how to do it well. And we're seeing in a number of occupations, number of professions where that kind of autonomy and control is being cut back or made, difficult, or you all you do is listen and do what somebody tells you. You don't have, even with all your training as an engineer or as a doctor or something like that, you don't have much say about what you're doing, and that is demoralizing and causes real problems for people. So again, a better match is what is the appropriate level of that autonomy, the control over how to do your job and do it well and take some pride in it. So that's one. I think workload people think about all the time, but it turns out that in many of the instances where we've worked with organizations, that hasn't been the big one. There's been something else. So another one that often pops up, as I already alluded to it, is the workplace community. And if there's a breakdown of communal norms into this socially toxic culture where you can't trust people are bullying each other, harassing, this kind of thing. A better match is how do you get a more supportive civil, kind of relationship among people who work together. And then I would say the other one that tends to pop up, and people often don't think about this, has to do with fairness. And this means really a mismatch is that there's somehow there's an absence of being unbiased, job conditions, which means that whatever the policies, whatever the practices, they're not being applied equitably to all workers, and people feel that they're not being treated fairly like other people. So how do you get a clearer commitment to more even-handed and kind of honest decisions and actions? When people feel that things are not fair, when there's cheating, there's lying, there's all of stuff going on, this is where discrimination lives, in fairness, this is going to make the cynicism really go skyrocket.
I've been at Blanchard for nearly 2 decades now, and one of the mismatches you talk about is one of the areas where I feel like our company can do some real good if we have the opportunity to work with them, and it's around values. If there isn't a values match, it's just so hard to feel connected to the organization. You're feeling you're fighting the machine at all times. How important is values, and more importantly, not how important it is, but what can you do if you're in an organization that clearly isn't a values match, but that's where you are?
Yeah, it's a good point. Values, this is the mismatch here. We're talking about ethical conflicts and moral dilemmas that workers have to contend with, on the job. And how do you get to a better place of clear values and meaningful work? This is, you find meaning in what you're doing, you're feeling proud of the kind of work you're doing. So the values mismatch, we often see this is like, in some cases, this is the deal breaker. This is the one where people say, I can't work in this hospital anymore because I'm not being, treated well in terms of what I do. I'm only here to essentially make money. I want to work with patients. I don't want to be treated like worker bees, all this kind of thing. And they will quit and leave at some point, take a pay cut, go somewhere else, saying, I can't stay here anymore. So it can be, people talking about the erosion of my soul, in terms of what I have to do here. And at some point, if not able to resolve it or change it, saying, I'm out of here. I can't keep doing this. So it can be a really, really, really important one. But it's one that also, as you sort of alluded to, is more difficult for people to raise, and talk about it at some level. And this is where having some way of getting an assessment of these issues in a more confidential way, without sort of pointing fingers at individual people, just to kind of get some of these issues on the table is really important. And how to discuss and work on in a shift from a kind of a me approach, it's only me or what do I do, to it's affecting a lot of us. What do we do? How do we change this? And when you get more sort of people kind of connecting around some of these issues, I think it then becomes easier to bring it to the attention of managers and leadership and say, we've got an issue here. So the example of one, for example, that we've seen a lot in healthcare, particularly during the COVID pandemic, people talk about moral injury. And what that means is it's that I have to do things that I think are morally questionable or difficult or I think are wrong, but the job is making me do it. I have to be the one to tell the people in the waiting room that they cannot go in and see their dying loved one because they can't, because of the exposure to COVID, and is saying it's hard to do. You want the family to be there or, whatever at that point, but you can't because of these other sorts of things. So these kinds of value conflicts, those kind of moral dilemmas, is something really very heavy, for a lot of people to have to deal with. And there really needs to be a way to say, how could we do this better so that you're not put in that kind of a position? How do we communicate it? How do we take turns? How do we, find a better way in which we deal with the hard stuff, but have less of that injury, if you will, for having to work like that.
All right. Well, this question goes out to those folks that are our dedicated listeners, that are feeling burnout, probably feeling overwhelmed, but they've made it this far into the podcast. And this is where we like to kind of mechanize some of the ideas in the LeaderChat podcast. What would you do as a first step if you were coaching somebody, if you're advising someone that they were feeling this way and they were feeling like, and they're trying to determine like, why am I feeling this way? But what can I do? And they want to get out of this rut. Where do they get started?
Actually, you've hit on one of the issues that I was mentioning before about how people kind of focus in on this as an individual issue rather than a more social or communal organizational issue. And so the thrust of our book is talking about the better matches between people and their jobs. It's not just the person. It's not just the job. It's actually that relationship, those matches. And so often what we have to be doing is focusing more on not just the individual, but on the other people with whom they work. What unit are they in, or the team, or the kind of occupational job category that they have. They may not be, in many cases, they are not alone in this. There are other people. So it's more of a we problem and not just an individual me kind of problem. And so it's one thing to do coaching, which I think, can do that. But once you frame the question in terms of what is it about you and your situation, you're not asking questions about that job environment and the conditions that may be those chronic stressors, causing the problem. And for that, you really need to bring in everybody else who is perhaps facing similar kinds of issues. So one thing I would advise is for people to actually connect with other, essentially who should be their best colleagues, the ones who know the job, are doing what you're doing, work with you, and kind of getting a better sense of how are we dealing with all of this. And this has been harder sometimes for some people when they're not actually working in person, during the pandemic. But if we're going to get at a better match between people and their jobs, it often means making changes or modifications in the job conditions, and that's going to affect a lot of other people, not just the individual. So I think there's been a tendency to focus on helping the individual cope, which is fine, but it leaves out the other part of how do we prevent or make less of a risk of burnout occurring. And that takes a broader focus beyond the individual. So we need to bring those two together. If that makes sense?
Oh, all of it makes sense. It's all great input to consider. And one of the other areas of focus we have here, we have a lot of leaders that listen to this. Mm-hmm. And so there's so much discussion around the other side of this coin. You talk about leaving, but those that quit and stay. And so if I'm a leader, what can I do specifically on an individual one-to-one basis? How can I help this process where people are feeling more heard and they're being nurtured so that they aren't feeling this incredible sense of overwhelm and burnout?
Yeah. We talk about it in the book, sort of 3 C's that we have learned about as we've worked with people and organizations on this kind of thing. And one of the first, the letter C is collaboration and communication. And what it means is that I think leadership, first line managers all the way up, to the top C-suite, need to be in better communication and hearing from people what's going on and what are some of the issues and problems. Make them a part of how we're going to go forward and what we might do that would alleviate some of these chronic job stressors, these pebbles in your shoe that are always there, always getting in the way, uncomfortable, making it difficult, etc. What we've been seeing, and this was true even before the pandemic, was that there was a lot more emphasis on top-down kind of thing in terms of any changes or any kind of modifications, or we're going to make it healthier here, here's what we're going to do. Not much input bottom-up or sideways or whatever, so that when I've been talking to employees, they're often saying, I've got all this training and do this job, but I none of us ever get asked how we might make it a little bit better. What are some of the things? Could we change this? Could we have, a different routine here? Or can we, get rid of, we don't subtract enough when people add things to our plate. And can we figure out how we could do that? So that kind of collaboration where there's much more mutual conversation around what's working well, what is not working so well, and being able to say to your people, so to speak, we care about you're doing a good job and feeling good here and enjoying what you're doing and being proud of it. How, what is it that needs to be changed? And what are some ideas? What are different possibilities for improving the match in control, or improving the match in reward or in values, or, whatever it happens to be? And so, we used to call it in past decades, walk around leadership, where you're really out there, people see you, talk to you, get a sense of we're on the same page in terms of trying to figure out something better, something to improve, and on a sort of continuous basis. And that would be important. The other 2 C's, just while I'm on this, is one is customize. Whatever kind of thing you want to do to try and make things better, make it your own. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It doesn't work at all. It has to be customized to who we are, what we're doing, the kind of jobs we have. And then this third one is a commitment to say, and we'll keep working on this until we get it right. And so it's not a one-day thing. It's not a weekend thing. It's not a quickie workshop sort of stuff. It's actually putting something in place that people are all in agreement on the same page, saying, yeah, let's try this because this might really help us work in a better way than we have now.
Some great tips in there. I love that you shared walk around leadership. It's something that Ken's well known for, right? The 1 minute manager, just getting out there and connecting with people and meeting them where they're at. So,
right.
Christina Maslach, co-author of the Burnout Challenge, if you could provide one idea, one vision, one thing as we kind of start to end our conversation here on the LeaderChat podcast, what would you share with our listeners?
I guess what I would say is that the overall goal that we have in all of this is to, create a better job environment that will produce better outcomes at all levels. And so when the relationship, and I just want to emphasize that relationship, it's two, it's the workers and the workplace. When it's functioning well, then the workers are going to thrive and the workplace is going to succeed. And that's kind of the win-win situation that we want to be able to get to.
If our listeners want to dig a little bit deeper into you, into your world, into the book, into the research, where would you send them?
We now have a website called theburnouchallenge.com. And I think that would provide a lot of background and other information about what we're writing about and the message we're trying to get out. So I would recommend that.
I love that. Christina, thank you so much. It has been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for sharing your insights and taking a little bit of time out of your day to join us here on the Blanchard LeaderChat podcast.
Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it.
And thank you for joining us for today's podcast. If you enjoyed this interview and like to learn more and also help us grow the audience, please subscribe to the LeaderChat podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play, or wherever you're listening. And please share this with your friends. The best way you can help us grow, though, is feedback. As Ken Blanchard says, feedback is the breakfast of champions. So please write us a review if you haven't already. And by the way, this podcast is sponsored by the Ken Blanchard Companies. If you'd like to learn more, there's even a lot of free resources to better yourself and your organization. Go to kenblanchard.com. You'll find all kinds of free tools and materials to help you and others grow. Thanks again to our guests for joining us today. For now, I have the pleasure of turning it over to Ken Blanchard for his thoughts on what we discussed. Here it is, your final minute with Ken Blanchard.
Thanks, Chad, for interviewing Christina Maslach about her book, which I really love, The Burnout Challenge, Managing People's Relationships with Their Job. And boy, is this an important issue, because there's a lot of people that feel that they're burnt out, they're tired, they're overworked in their own mind. And what she really points out is that it's not just about you, because a lot of people put the burden on themselves. What's wrong with me? And I must be this or that and all. No, it's a we problem. It's a cultural problem. And how do you involve other people that are, co-workers, managers and all, and taking a look at this issue? Because if you look around and you feel burnout, other people do too. So it's a really important issue. And I love the way she has her 3 C's if you're going to really deal with this. The first one is collaboration. How do you communicate with other people? How do you manage by walking around? How do you get people involved? Because again, it's not a me problem, it's a we problem. And then customized. How can you take a look at your own job and talk with your supervisor and all? And how can you customize it so it works for you and the organization? And finally, the third C is commitment, which is how do you keep on keeping on? Because it's an issue that you don't want to drop. And so I just think it's a fabulous, fabulous thing you're doing with Christina, that helping people to look at burnout and deal with it and not blame themselves, but realize it's a cultural issue and involve others. Wow. Thanks, Chad. Thanks, Christina. Boy, this is important stuff. Share this with your people. Talk about it in your own workplace, all of you listening, because it can really help you create a better work environment for everyone. Take care of yourselves.